but that is because the dad dropped her from her insurance, and I see nothing wrong with that.
I do have an apartment. I have an apartment. A castle. I applied for my apartment 2 days ago, and I signed it. I'm 18. I applied for my apartment 2 days ago.
See?
And I got approved for my stuff.
Why would anyone pay for their daughter's insurance? What would he still pay for it? It makes no sense for the dad to pay for it. The dad did nothing wrong. The girl just doesn't solve. She's sick. She needs to be off YouTube. She's mentally unstable and shouldn't be on the platform. I legitimately... All of this, you just love to see this poor little brat pointing fingers on his dad.
Talking to somebody on Discord about something completely unrelated, and she decided to spam call me, knowing that I was live, to embarrass me on live, and then making a live stream about completely slandering me. So, am I really the one that's
Something's in the way.
out there? No, I'm just trying to figure out the lie. The lies. If somebody decides to slander you and lie, and sort of totally like justify to like clear up the lie. So there's been multiple lies made. Multiple, like, I didn't do that. All I did was fall asleep. Remember, this is all over me sleeping. Right. I'm not lying. I'm gonna get some pictures of you guys. I'm gonna get a pretty But anyway, guys. Yeah, people need to stop slandering the rash me. I'm not lying.
What's your fault that I did something wrong? You got me in trouble for it because of your place and your house's rules. I have to follow my dad. She doesn't understand what she did wrong. And we're gonna parents have to follow their rules. And this girl wasn't following any rules. She did whatever she wanted. The dad did nothing wrong. The dad has some balls for keeping this girl out onto the street where she belongs. The girl is trying to paint the dad as the villain, as the anime villain over here.
Something's blocking this.
According to her, she did nothing wrong.
Won't budge.
I'm 2 seconds away from passing out, so I'm just going to have my friend Dr. Demonic take over because I'm about to faint. The courage is too strong, guys.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm that one skeleton with a Dr. Pepper addiction that talks into a microphone, but you can call me Dr. Demonic. Sensitive asked me if I wanted to record a 2-minute segment talking about events in this video from that human sex doll that bullied a cancer patient and got kicked out of her house. So, that's what I'm going to do. In this video, the bitch makes a lot of claims about her father, but the one I want to highlight is that he lied about losing his job and he hasn't worked in 3 or 4 years. This is a lie, and I'm going to debunk it right now. So her father goes by the name of Jim West, and he happens to be an award-winning author. This makes it easy to determine if he really has been unemployed that long, because if he has, he wouldn't have any publications since 2018 at least. Well, then please explain to me why his most recent publication is from 5 months ago. Although what she may be referring to is his job in cybersecurity, because he had worked in cybersecurity for 20 years before retiring in 2019 to become an author full-time. Now, I did some research, and it turns out that cybersecurity pays pretty well. And if I had to guess with his experience, he was likely in a top position, which means he could have been making upwards of $200,000 per year. And say, if he used that money smartly and maybe did some investing, then it's very well possible for him to have retired when he did at age 42. So given these facts and that she's a plastic bitch chicken that bullied a cancer patient, it's my interpretation that she is lying. Same as he said when she made the call to the police claiming her life was in danger when her father kicked her out, because in the phone call she got from her father, not once did he say or even imply that he was going to physically harm her. In my eyes, what she's doing is she's attempting to smear her father's name and make herself look like the victim, which, given that her head is completely filled with hot air, isn't surprising to me whatsoever. At the end of the day, this bitch is just a pathetic waste of oxygen, and while I wouldn't wish death upon her, say if she were on fire and I had a glass of water, I would go ahead and drink it. Anyways, that's all the time I have. If you want to check out my channel, it's probably in the description. Otherwise, search for Dr. Demonic and you'll probably find me. Thanks to Sensitive for letting me ramble for this short period of time. I'm out.
Anyways, guys, I just wanted to make this early just to wrap it up. It's been 3 weeks since the incident. She still hasn't learned. She's still the same person. She thinks she did nothing wrong. She's extremely she thinks the world revolves around her. And now she's looking for private DMs and incriminating her father, saying that he tried to kill her, saying the most out-of-pocket shit you could ever think of. girl is legitimately insane. And she's doing what she did wrong. And I really hope in the near future, if she keeps vaping, I pray to God she doesn't get cancer, because it would be the funniest shit ever. It would be so ironic. I would love it. I would love to see that. I would actually pay to see that. There's nothing else we can do besides A, laughing at her, and B, sending her to the street. You know, I might even send her to the Tijuana street, because it's getting pretty bad. It's getting pretty bad with these spoiled brats. I don't know what makes someone want to act like this girl. And no, just because you have more money than someone else doesn't make you a better person. Anyways, guys, that's as much as I can take. So glad my friend Dr. Demonic could come on here to help me out, because I was about to stop recording, go outside, touch some grass, but I just had to finish this. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate all of you. Thank you to my channel for continuing support and every video. Make sure to go and subscribe to my friend Dr. Demonic on YouTube. See you next time, where I talk about another spoiled girl.
What's up, everyone? Alex here. This review of Trails of Cold Steel 4 will contain spoilers to the conclusion of Trails of Cold Steel 3. So if you haven't finished that game or have yet to play any game in the series, I highly recommend checking either my review of Trails of Cold Steel 3 or my video titled, Which Game in the Cold Steel series should you play first? With all that preamble out of the way, let's get into the review. Anyone who's ever finished Trails of Cold Steel 3 knows the agony and sorrow that awaited them at the end. A cliffhanger ending with no word or mention of its follow-up announced for Western Shores. This latter part is important, as the Trail series has had a long history of localization challenges. Much like Class 7, players who witnessed Cold Steel 3's ending weren't sure when they'd see the saga come to its full conclusion. That is, until news of Cold Steel 4 arrived in April 2020, announcing its release later in the year. Many months and hours later, I've finally gotten a chance to play through this exciting follow-up to the events of Cold Steel 3, going into it with only one question in mind. Saddled with wrapping up the Cold Steel quadrilogy and the entire overarching story spanning all the way back to Trails in the Sky, does this ambitious finale deliver a satisfying journey to this massive ongoing saga? Trails of Cold Steel 4 is the exciting conclusion to both the long-running Trails of Cold Steel series and the overarching story that began with Trails in the Sky, developed by Falcom and published by NIS America, who provided this review code. Due to the combined efforts of numerous organizations led by Chancellor Gilead Osborne, the Phantasmal Blaze plan was successfully executed, bringing about a great twilight that plunged all of Erebonia in a dark miasma. This singular event led to a declaration of all-out war with neighboring Calvard and a mandatory conscription of Erebonia's citizenry. Caught in the middle are the members of Thor's military academy's Class 7, who, in the final moments leading up to this fateful event, witness a friend's tragic sacrifice, triggering Reen to unleash his ogre power and driving him uncontrollably berserk, ultimately leading to his capture. As Erebonia draws closer to war, various factions led by Estelle Bright and Lloyd Bannings continue to work behind the scenes in a final attempt to stop the war from happening. Meanwhile, the former Class 7 try to recover from their devastating defeat, lamenting the disappearance of their longtime leader and friend as the gears of destiny continue to turn. Because this game is in a unique situation of being a direct sequel to Trails of Cold Steel 3, instead of going over elements that have generally remained on par between both games, this review will be focusing on talking about changes to the combat, progression systems, and the total shifts and alterations to the game's narrative structure, without spoiling its story, of course.
The most noticeable change you'll encounter in Trails of Cold Steel 4 lies in its combat and progression systems. Simply put, both of these systems are an amalgamation of mechanics from the previous game, with some returning from Cold Steel 2. For starters, grade points now go all the way up to 7 as opposed to 5 in the previous game. While this might sound like this higher point cap will allow you to repeatedly use some of the more powerful Brave orders from Cold Steel 3, I'm afraid I have some bad news. All orders have been tuned and rebalanced. What this means is that Eunice Sledgehammer, for example, will now cost 2 BP instead of 1, and will now only deal 150% ring damage as opposed to 300%. That said, new to Cold Steel 4 is the ability to upgrade certain orders by way of trial chests, which make their return from Cold Steel 2. These trial chests function much like they do in said game. You're given a specific set of party members to use in order to take on a group of monsters on a battlefield, which rewards you with an upgraded order. Ultimately, all of these BP and orders changes feel more like a reaction to the overpowered state of some of the previous game's orders, and the higher BP cap doesn't really feel as significant of a change as it does on paper. The orb mint system in Cold Steel 4 has been revamped as well, with the ability to upgrade slots returning from Cold Steel 2, as well as the ability to equip sub-master quartz returning from Cold Steel 3. Much like how trial chests remained unchanged, slot upgrades continue to serve a similar role in Cold Steel 4 as it did in its original implementation, and is meant to be a gating factor that'll prevent you from equipping more powerful quartz. But of the two changes, I find that the alterations to sub-master quartz could be more meaningful, as every member of your party can now equip the same master quartz as their own sub-master quartz. Other returning features from Cold Steel 2 include Lost Arts, which are powerful arts that span a full EP gauge, as well as the ability to summon Panzer Soldats during combat, though this isn't quite as powerful as it was in their previous appearance. Finally, perhaps the most significant thing about Cold Steel 4's combat and progression isn't a new feature, but rather the presence of playable party members made up of characters from Trails in the Sky and the Crossbell games. With a large cast comes complications, however, as the exact same interface and tools exist to manage your party's quartz and equipment. I'm personally someone who likes to meticulously adjust my character's quartz bills and go through each piece of equipment they're wearing, and I've literally spent hours making sure my characters are equipped with the build that I want them to have, rendering the present auto-equip functionalities useless for folks like me who like to do this kind of minutia. I do recognize that this quote-unquote problem is only unique to Cold Steel 4 with its larger-than-usual cast and to my style of play. I think it's still worth mentioning for others who play the same way. Perhaps a method to save and learn this would help cut down these tasks. I digress. While there are numerous tweaks, additions, returning features, and adjustments made to Cold Steel 4's combat, much of its gameplay still revolves around breaking enemies, impeding attacks, and the usual turn manipulation system introduced in the previous games. It is in this instant, for the most part, the main things change. There's comfort to be had with the combat and progression system that remains largely similar for the standard series, despite those limitations. And if you've loved these systems before, more of it, then you'll enjoy what Cold Steel 4 has to offer. The biggest reason why it's important to play Cold Steel 4 is to witness the lead-up to the series' climactic finale. It's through this lens that I find it necessary to talk about Cold Steel 4's narrative in relation to Cold Steel 3. This abstraction will allow us to understand the tonal shifts in Cold Steel 4 without ever any connection to any specific beats in its story, allowing you to discover and appreciate these changes while still keeping the game's plentiful twists to surprise. Introducing Cold Steel 3 is given the helm of a brand new Class 7. This singular event triggered two things to occur. For one, Cold Steel 3 felt like a return of familiar stories from Cold Steel. This also forced longtime fans to temporarily abandon their hopes of a quick reunion with the members of old Class 7. While I don't particularly have much of an issue with the first part, it is the second part that I take umbrage with. I want to discuss this by bringing the series protagonist, Solid Snake, from a distance, but just the player playing different characters, merely interacting with him on several occasions during the story. While it upset many fans at the time, this new perspective served well to amplify the seeming impossibility of Snake's actions, with many players, years later, declaring this perspective shift as a stroke of genius. Cold Steel 3 tries to utilize a similar approach for the old Class 7, with said members occasionally teaming up with a new Class 7 throughout its story, only to leave shortly after the conclusion of their story arc. The problem with this is that you're not just dealing with just one person, but rather a fairly large group of individuals, which you're also given control of when you encounter them in the story. While I will always welcome the return of old Class 7, there are various gameplay implications that, in their own way, affect the narrative. For instance, if Laura joins in Class 7 early in the story, she's quite powerful and offers significant aid. However, when she returns to the party later, the game doesn't take into account the current strength of new Class 7, joining the group is only a few levels above them. Keep in mind that I'm not trying to argue that old Class 7 should be overpowered, therefore make the game easy. But this miscalculation downplays the years of experience Laura has over the new class from a narrative perspective. In other words, if the intention of these cameo appearances is for the player to revere old Class 7 and their abilities, this should be consistently reflected in their stats as well. Instead, these cameos serve to frustrate longtime fans who want nothing more than to play with their favorite members of old Class 7. It should also be noted that while Cold Steel 3 notoriously goes through new Class 7's backstories and histories, the group doesn't really truly come into their own until closer to the game's conclusion. And while there is a feeling of progression with this cast's thoughts and perspectives throughout, these aren't really challenged until the end, with the aftermath represented immediately once we catch up with them in Cold Steel 4. While I personally enjoyed Cold Steel 3's story despite these criticisms, it's important to bring these up because Cold Steel 4 corrects many of these issues. The conclusion of the previous game has, in many ways, sealed the resolve of new Class 7. That's despite them being standard stories. This conclusion needed to happen for us to quickly empathize with this Class 7's plight, being defeated even after doing everything in their power to stop the fantastic place from executing. With that feeling also comes a profound sense of loss, as Reed, new Class 7's instructor, is nowhere to be found. And Reed's presence is still felt by way of new Class 7. While Reed's relationship with the members of old Class 7 helped shape him into the individual he is today, new Class 7, by way of this instruction, has come to embody all of the values and beliefs of Cold Steel, representing both respect and Yuna's sense of justice, Kurt's dutiful sense of loyalty, Ash's brash demeanor, Altina's tactical prowess, and Kinsey's flirtiness are all extreme representations of a portion of Reed's psyche, which ultimately allows them to closely relate to him. When the chips are down, it's no surprise then that it's not old Class 7 leads in charge. That task falls upon new Class 7. And that's despite having faltered at the end of Cold Steel 3. It feels so good to see new Class 7 ultimately rise up their failures, leading a satisfying rally cry that unites all Class 7 in its seemingly desperate attempt to undo the disastrous conclusion of the previous game. It's with this context that I now understand the choice behind new Class 7's smaller casts, with Cold Steel 4 allowing for ample opportunity to elaborate on what of its members, as well as to finally provide time to properly catch up with their Class 7. Best of all, the way Cold Steel 4 gains Class 7 into the overall story feels more natural and better thought out than it was in Cold Steel 3, giving the game a helping of that good old JRPG adventure feel amidst its politics and machinations. But you just won't be playing with Class 7, because Cold Steel 4 boasts the largest playable cast in series history to date. While the game was billed as the end of Saga in Japan, I do think that its narrative beats and story feel closer to that of a reunion, with many of Trail's characters reappearing after being absent from previous games. It's through these appearances, plot twists, and reveals that despite the gameplay and story cadence feeling awfully familiar, that the game is able to give a sense of heightened importance in everything you do. ramping up to a grand conclusion that I'll leave for you to discover on your own. Well, the Trail series is many things to other people. A socio-political story for one, or a tale of hubris for another, Cold Steel has always been about the people for me, first and foremost. And despite some characters demonstrating unwavering yet questionable loyalty to their causes, in addition to the many fantastical elements that sometimes overcomplicate an otherwise fun plot, the ride to uncover the depth of the game's conspiracies has always felt enjoyable and satisfying. And it's from this perspective that I absolutely treasured and loved my time with Cold Steel 4. Despite what you've heard about Trails of Cold Steel 4, no one will ever prepare you for the inevitable conclusion of the saga. Right from the start, the bar is raised immediately, as you'll feel each moment with heightened importance, and a powerful desire to see this tale through to the very end. Now, while some will be tempted to pick apart the small things that the game didn't do right, and if its Japanese release is any indication, it's probably going to be plenty, I've chosen to recognize the entire adventure as a whole, and appreciate the ambition and the excitement it delivers. Trails of Cold Steel 4 is a fitting conclusion to one of the longest continuing stories in JRPG history, and no other game will be able to deliver a finale like this one for a very long time.
Women choose Renew Life probiotics because they're made for us, with premium probiotic strains, formulated, tested, and guaranteed for a woman's digestive system. We know women are different, which is why Renew Life probiotics are too, made for what makes you different.
Hey, we do a countdown list like this every so often, so we want to talk about 15 great PlayStation 4 games that are often ignored. Now, for some of you hardcore fans out there, you may have heard of them. Statistically, a lot of people haven't. So we want to highlight some games that have forgotten over the years or were whatever. Some underrated games we really enjoyed on PS4. We've got 15 of them, so let's get started off with number 15. Amazon is the first game from developers Giant Squid, which is made up of some of the people that made Journey. So if you're a fan of Journey, you're probably really like it because of this. It's a fun experience than anything else. Just like Journey, you play as a diver who's swimming around this vast ocean, interacting with different ocean life, solving some life puzzles. There's a bit of a narrative weaved into as you kind of learn more about this ancient civilization that was wiped out, but it's all really vague and nice. You're also working to restore life to certain areas of the water that have been kind of harvested by these mysterious ocean pyramids. The game is really just a sight to see. It's very colorful and busy, and is best played in a very dark room because of the way the game just kind of will illuminate the room. It's just a really cool experience, especially with the music done by the legendary Austin Winter. Just like Journey, it's a very calm and relaxing experience, something that we always appreciate here. So if you're a fan of Journey, or maybe a fan of Atlas or something like that, Giant Squid's more recent PS5 exclusive, this is definitely worth giving a go. Now over at number 14 on the more mainstream side, Alien Isolation is actually one of the best Alien games ever made, but it's the one still the least talked of. In this, you play as Ripley's daughter, and you're tasked with sneaking your way around the center, and it can be pretty terrifying and just a lot of fun considering the horror play down. Alien Isolation managed to the aesthetic, the gadgets, the tension, the atmosphere. There's also a lot of encounters with androids too, which is pretty cool. The game makes really good use of darkness too. It is looker and it's satisfying to play. And to be honest, we always just hope this game gets more attention because it deserves it, and also because we want more games like this. We need less alien games like Colonial Marines, more like Alien Isolation. Next over at number 13, we have Sleeping Dogs Definitive Edition. This is a game that was released actually in the late Xbox 360, PS3 era, but got spiffed up, cleaned up, re-releases on newer consoles, and goddamn, if you've been watching Game Ranks for a long time, we've talked this game. Sleeping Dogs is absolutely phenomenal in terms of an open world. There is a good story because you are an scenarios, which combat scenarios always emphasize fists and weapons over bullets and guns, and that makes a hell of a difference because it's really cool to use the environment to your advantage, like throwing down an elevator shaft, or kicking through a garbage can, or telephone booth, or anything like that. It is satisfying from beginning to end. Graphically, it still holds up, and it's worth checking out if you've never gotten your hands on it. Now is the time, because it's probably super cheap. Next over at number 12, we have Guilty Gear XRD Rev 2. This game is a must, especially if you're a fighting game fan. If you like Street Fighter, King of Fighters, stuff like that, if you haven't tried this one, you're definitely in for a treat. This game puts so much attention into the small details, too. It's really well tuned for latency, frame counting during animations, balancing on characters, tight controls, gameplay, all of that stuff is really there, and it's what you're looking for if you're hardcore. Plus, it also really goes above and beyond to teach you how to play with tutorials that teach you just not the combos and stuff, but the actual strategies to beat specific techniques or specific characters or types of players. There's a group of people out there that consider this one of the best fighting games that they've ever played, which is crazy considering you just do not hear this name brought up in more mainstream circles. You always hear about the bigger players, and you don't often hear about Guilty Gear. Also, if you are more of a casual player, it's worth pointing out also that the art design is just amazing. So if you're just looking to have some fun and play a really cool-looking fighting game, you have that here too. It's just a really good game that deserves way more attention and way more love from the gaming community at large. It's just good. Next over at number 11, in a similar vein, Kingdom Come Deliverance. Another game that released to pretty okay reviews all around, but it found a community that absolutely loved it and embraced it and has held on for a bunch of updates and has been enjoying the game for years. Me personally, at first I wasn't too hot on the game, but as years progressed, I have come to appreciate the community behind it that really appreciates the attention to realism, detail, the slower pace, all that, and just truly be magical, especially if that's just what you are looking for. There are some people out there that really just want this very
Always nice
specific
to see a
level of
friendly
realism
face.
in their games and just how the gameplay works, and Kingdom Come Deliverance is that. If you like the Middle Ages and you love knights and swords and all that, but with a bit more emphasis on realism, kind of like with that classic PC-style RPG stuff, check out Kingdom Come Deliverance. Next over at number 10, we have Bloodstained, Ritual of the Night. Now, for those that don't know, this was that game that was funded by Kickstarter and was being led by the former producer of the Castlevania series, Koji Igarashi. Now, gameplay-wise, to be reductive, it's similar to Symphony of the Night type Castlevania stuff. It follows your typical Metroidvania template, side-scrolling, fighting bosses, and learning new abilities that you can now use to open up new parts of areas that you've already explored. You know how it goes. You know, it also has somewhat of a gothic vibe, which is pretty cool if you want to call it that. And Bloodstained also has two other games in the canon made by a different dev team, Curse of the Moon and Curse of the Moon 2, which are also very good, worth mentioning here, very much like the more classic Castlevania games. So no matter what type of Vania you prefer, there is something in this Bloodstained series for you to check out and give some love. It is one of the bigger games on this list. We do actually expect this series and this whole brand to continue, and we're looking forward to it. Now over at number 9, Firewall Zero Act. This is a 4 versus 4 tactical shooter. This is the one that kind of surprised us. We're all big fans of VR here, but you know, no offense, we don't always think of VR titles considering the low power. This is definitely like Rainbow Six inspired. It also supports the controller, which is one of the best VR peripherals. And another reason other than just remarkable. The tracking is also pretty impressive. Aren't the best VR controllers out there. It also looks pretty damn good for a PSVR title as well. There's just a lot of other benefits, especially with friends, because it does require coordination between the weapons, and that makes it the most fun. It's almost like the old days of SOCOM and the old days of Rainbow Six, but in VR. If that's not a good pitch, I don't know what is. Next over at number 8, Titanfall 2. Now, we know people know about it. Love Titanfall 2 as they do. But honestly, we just know about that. Titanfall to Titanfall 2 was a pretty drastic jump. Not in gameplay, I'd almost say the same in a lot of ways, but the biggest change is the of a really simple game. The first one in error is Titanfall 2 absolutely nailed it. It was almost like a buddy cop story, except your buddy is a big-ass robot with giant guns and swords. The story itself is honestly kind of whatever, but it moves along. It's super entertaining, kind of like an action movie, and the combat is just so good that it makes the game really that much better. Wall running and sliding around just makes you feel like an action hero, and the campaign isn't very long, to be honest, but it's really well paced and there's a bunch of interesting scenarios throughout. The multiplayer is also great. A lot of it is essentially what inspired Apex Legends. But really, more than anything, Titanfall 2 has probably one of the best time travel bits in a single-player campaign that we've seen in quite a while. We just think that campaign, more than anything, is worth experiencing, and if you always were kind of skeptical, now the game is always so cheap on sale, you see this game almost practically for free. So, seriously, check out Titanfall 2 if you haven't. Over.
Want to manage your credit cards, bank accounts, and savings together? Make a better view of your money happen. Google Pay makes it simple to link your accounts, so you can easily view your accounts together. Check your total balance across your accounts. Search for any transactions or receipts.
We're at number 7, another more AAA budget, but still underappreciated game, Prey. Now, yes, it's not really like the original Prey, or the original Prey 2 that was hyped up for years, but ultimately canceled, and then they made this, but still, this is a very creative and cool game. I would say, if you like PC-style first-person games, or something like Dishonored, Prey might be up your alley. It's more of a thinking man's first-person shooter, because it's not really a shooter. What they do here, from the gameplay mechanics to the actual level design to just the sci-fi stuff that they built here, is really unique and very satisfying. But I will say it's very much for a specific type of player. You're going to either really love this game or kind of be indifferent about it. Still, consider thinking about it. Check it out. Next, over at number 6, we have Odin Sphere, Leftrazor. I never know if I'm saying that exactly right, but this is a remake of the 2007 original game, and it's one of the best 2D side-scrolling action RPGs that you can find. At first glance, it might look like the same game because it preserves its art style and overall presentation, but it enhances almost every aspect of it. RPG systems, new combat, spells, more like the fact that it now runs at 60 FPS. This really changes the experience, especially in combat. It's an epic Norse adventure about 5 heroes trying to stop the apocalypse and fighting enemies that maybe have their own justified motives too. It can be pretty interesting. It's just a really great game with a great story, great gameplay, and a cool visual style. Next, over at number 5, A Plague Tale: Innocence. This is another one of those not AAA, not indie, AA type experiences, but it's just a really cool adventure of 2 young children making their way through a plague-ridden land. You play as the older sister, trying to escort the younger brother. You have to kind of manage him sometimes, alongside doing puzzles, avoiding enemies, being chased, and even some light combat scenarios. It's a pretty well-rounded and well-paced experience with emotion, challenge, beautiful visuals, and incredible, almost shocking art design. I put out the before you buy video for when this game first released. I really can't recommend it enough, especially if you like stuff like Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice. Please check out A Plague Tale: Innocence. Next up at number 4, we're going to talk about Mad Max, the kind of but not really tie-in game to Fury Road. Now, we're big advocates for this game over here, and it flew under a lot of people's radar because it came out on the same day as Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. I mean, no offense to Mad Max, but come on, you know more people are going to jump on a Metal Gear Solid game. But, hey, don't miss it. Mad Max was a blast. It uses Arkham-style melee combat, which is really satisfying, but it's a bit slower paced and a bit more challenging. And there's also really cool, fun car combat. It's simple, but effective. And you're constantly upgrading Max and his car, and the visual upgrades are nice too. And so you see Max and your car looking cool, but you actually get benefits. The light RPG upgrades are really cool. The open world is also pretty big.
Yeah, stop that.
Big, and it's unique in the sense of being visually
Stop.
stunning and fun to explore, even though it's just an empty wasteland, which is impressive how they did that. Mad Max is always on sale, it's always cheap. If you're looking for a good, fun, open
Go
world
to sleep.
kick about in, check it out. Moving on down to number 3, we have What Remains of Edith Finch. This is a first-person exploration game where you play as a member of the Finch family who returns to the Finch family home after some time away and some weird shit goes down. Now, the Finch family suffers from a curse that kills all but one family member of each generation in a very weird and out there way, with one family member left to continue the family line. You explore the Finch house and look around everyone's room and experience how everyone died. Their rooms are kind of set up like shrines or something. It's kind of eerie. The story is really cool and experimental and unique, and we've really never played anything like it. It hooks you almost immediately, too. So if you like narrative-heavy games like Gone Home or something like that, this is possibly worth diving into. Down to number 2, The Evil Within 2 is often neglected and not brought up enough in conversation. It really improved upon the original game in a lot of ways, kind of did its own thing, fell back on some normal game conventions, twisted some others on their heads, and it was just a good, fun, accessible horror experience. If you like a little action, if you like gross enemy types and weird standard survival horror mechanics, and of course just lots and lots of violence and some open-ended levels. The Evil Within 2 might be worth checking out if you haven't already, especially because it's another game on this list. I hate to be a broken record, but it ends up on super cheap discounts, so you can check it out for like nothing, and if you get a game for like $5, you think, hey, what the hell? And Evil Within 2 is definitely one of those. Now down to number 1, we're going to stand up for what's right and mention the Order 1886. This one is completely forgotten, totally left out of the conversation, because there was a lot of negative perception when it was first released back in the early days of PlayStation 4, because it's criminally short. It's a very short game, and by the time it feels like it really gets going, it stops. But now that the game is usually always on sale for well under $20, we want to die on this and say that this game's actually pretty cool. Vampires, werewolves, alternate 1800s sci-fi, there's so much cool stuff going on here with some solid, fairly simple third-person combat, some spooky elements, some very good visual designs, and honestly, an experience unlike anything on PlayStation 4. And yet, after this game released, it was quickly forgotten. So like now, if you get it on a really good sale, we think your purchase is justified and it's worth the experience. Because it's really cool. I don't care that everybody hates me that I like it. I'm going to gush about it, damn it. Oh, we also got some bonus games to mention real quick before we go. First, Alienation, The Legend of Heroes, Trials of Cold Steel 3, The Somnian Files, and Fist of the North Star, Lost Paradise. These are some games that we don't think get enough love, so we just wanted to talk about them real quick. Although, this is kind of a kicking off point because there are so many other games that could make this list. So we want to hear from you guys in the comments. What games often get ignored? What games don't get enough love that you really enjoy playing on PS4? I can think of so many off the top of my head immediately. Gravity Rush, stuff like that. So let's hear from you guys down there. If you enjoyed this video, maybe you were convinced about a game, clicking the like button is the best way you can help us out. We would really appreciate that. And if you're new, consider subscribing, maybe hitting that notification bell, because we put out videos every single day. But hey, as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.
Okay, look, please stop watching that other video. It isn't good. I spent like 4 hours on it at most. It's full of little bits of misinformation. It's got editing errors and typos in it. It doesn't do a good job explaining the actual process. It's just not a good video, and I'm kind of unhappy with the fact that it's like super successful compared to anything else I've ever done. I literally just clickbaited the shit out of something and just so happened to get super lucky with the release window. With that in mind, this video sort of serves two purposes at once. Firstly, it's an update that uses the version of the game that the vast majority of people are going to be playing at this point. And secondly, this is kind of a make-good. This is my attempt to make something better that I'm more proud of. With that in mind, can you reach level 99 in Yukiko's castle in Persona 4 Golden? Yes, but it's going to be tedious in different ways. So the initial question to address is, what has actually changed between the Persona 4 setup and the Persona 4 Golden setup? And the answer is really nothing, for the most part. The Kaiwan Victory Cry glitch is still available starting at level 24, and it's still first available on April 24th. So in terms of this absolutely godforsaken challenge run, the question is, what has actually changed? And the answer for the most part is just that Golden introduces 5 difficulties instead of 3, but in actuality, there are really only 3 distinct difficulties, and the only differences between the middle 3 are changes to player damage given and player damage taken. As with before, I did this on the easiest setting available, this time being very easy instead of easy. So what actually distinguishes the 5 or 3 difficulty settings? Well, one of the great things about Persona 4 Golden over the original Persona 4 is that it allows customization of difficulty in 6 main categories. Firstly, there are the 2 stats, damage taken and damage dealt. Now, between easy, medium, and hard, these are the only stats that change. On easy, the player has a maximum of damage dealt and a minimum of damage taken, while on normal, they're both set to a medium setting, and on hard, they have a minimum of damage dealt and a maximum of damage taken. Where the actual variance in difficulty comes in is in the other stats available to change. Firstly and least importantly is whether or not the player is able to retry battles from the start of the battle or from the start of the floor they are on when they are down in combat. On very hard, the player has to reload a save, like in all of the difficulties in the original Persona 4. While on very easy, the player can restart from the start of any battle they fail. Meaning if a boss knocks you out, you restart from the beginning of that boss fight. On easy, normal, and hard, however, the player doesn't restart from the start of the fight, but they can restart that floor that they were on when they were knocked out. So if you were knocked out during a boss fight, you resume at the start of the boss fight floor. The second two and two far more important difficulty changes are XP earned from battles and yen earned from battles, yen being the money. On very easy, the player receives what I estimate to be around a 1.5 times multiplier to both XP and yen earned from every battle, while from what I can best tell on very hard, it's a times 0.5, so you're receiving a roughly half. This is why I don't recommend anyone, even the most masochistic of people, play Persona 4 Golden on very hard. It's not a good challenge, and Persona 4 Original on hard was not necessarily a good challenge either, but Persona 4 Golden on hard is an incredibly, incredibly tedious challenge, on top of just being a hard game. For every hour that you spend grinding in easy, normal, or hard in Persona 4 Golden, expect to spend 4 hours to get the equivalent results grinding in very hard. It is just not worth it. Even if you're not doing a challenge like this and you're just playing the game normally, don't touch very hard. Now luckily you can customize your difficulty, which if you're going to do that, I would recommend you play my personal Hard Plus difficulty, which is basically just Persona 4 hard mode. I really don't understand why Golden's very hard is the way it is, other than, I mean, it says it's for people who like to hurt themselves. So go hog wild if that's your sort of thing. Playing on very easy, I was able to get my character from level 10 to level 24 in roughly an hour. If you get really lucky with the new shuffle time mechanic, you could probably get it a lot faster. I did. So when you're getting ready to fuse your Kaiwan, you can choose to do it how I described as the stupid way before, which is to raw fuse an Ukobak and a Ghoul to get a Kaiwan, and then hope that you get the, at best, 1 in 3 chance to have a chance to get Tetrakarn to change into Victory Cry. Let's talk for a minute about why this is the stupid way and why you shouldn't do it. If you don't level up Ghoul or Ukobak at all before fusing, you will make a Kaiwan with Tetrakarn, Cellbreaker, and Mamuda. When the game considers these skills for skill change, as far as is known, they're considered a complete neutral, meaning you have a 33.3 chance that Tetrakarn is chosen for change. In 4 Vanilla, there were 23 rank 7 skills, meaning that you had a 1/3 chance of having a 1 in 23 chance. Now, I am very, very bad at math, but by my numbers, that equals out to 1 in 69 chance. Nice, but not great, assuming that you'll only need to fuse 69 times with some of that good old-fashioned gambler's flacky. So here's the alternative way, which I did a very bad job at explaining in my old video, and which should hopefully save you some time if you execute it correctly. Start by getting Ukobak, Ghoul, and Pixie as drops during shuffle time. Unfortunately, you're completely at the mercy of RNGesus for these, and it could take a while if you're particularly unlucky. Pixie appears on floors 1 to 5, Ghoul appears on floor 7, and then Ukobak appears on floors 1 to 4, but people claim he can also appear on 7. I have yet to see it happen, but who am I to question the wiki? Once you have your ingredients, and hopefully some backup money, you start by fusing Ukobak and Ghoul into Kaiwan. Your goal is for Tetrakarn to change. It doesn't matter what Tetrakarn changes into, though if you got Victory Cry on your first try, then that would be pretty fucking neat. When you get Tetrakarn to change, fuse an Oberon out of Pixie and Ghoul. Then fuse Oberon and Kaiwan into Matador. When you do, make certain to pass on the changed Tetrakarn skill. We'll call him David. At this point, you should save your game, because this next step can be an absolute bastard. You want to fuse Matador with another Ghoul to make McCoy. What you need to happen is you need to pass on David, then have it change again, but not back into Tetrakarn. If another skill gets changed, or if it changes back into Tetrakarn, reload your save and try again. Now, fuse your McCoy with a new Pixie to make a new Oberon that inherits David again. Save after you do this, because now you need to fuse Oberon and a new Kaiwan to make another Matador. If you've done this right, you will now have a Matador with 2 rank 7 skills that are Tetraconic. If you fuse this Matador with an Ukobon, you will create a Kaiwan with 5 skills, 3 of which are rank 7 and can become Victory Cry. This increases your odds from a 1 in 69 chance to a generously rounded 3 in 115 chance. Now, if you're like me and failed a lot of math classes, that may not seem much better, but you'll have to trust me on this one, it's more than twice as likely. Luck can still absolutely screw you, but I got it doing this myself in roughly an hour. Compared to doing it the stupid way in Persona 4 Vanilla, which was probably closer to 2 or 3 hours. I think it was around that point where I realized one of life's great joys is in having a room full of... So, you have your Victory Cry Kaiwan, and now you can fuse and refuse this Kaiwan into anything and everything you want until you eventually have a compendium full of Victory Cry personas. You want Victory Cry Izanagi? You got it! Victory Cry Slime? It's yours, my friend. Now all you have left to do is the grinding itself. I mentioned previously that on very easy, the player receives a 1.5 times modifier to XP gain. However, you will still reach the point where you begin to receive 1 XP for every battle. If you're very lucky, you can get a few XP up Arcanas to make some battles give a whole 3 XP. But at this point, you're locked into what's probably several hundred, if not 1,000 hours of grinding. Your bud Tevin, who I shamelessly stole the idea of the first video from, has been slowly going insane attempting to do this same thing but in Persona 5, so I don't recommend it. At the end of my first video, I said that I would be doing it on my Twitch. How has that gone? It hasn't. I hate to disappoint you, but it's not happening. It's not interesting to make, and it's not interesting to watch. If you want to see it happen, by all means, do it for yourself, and shine on, you crazy diamond. I suppose I don't really have anything interesting to end with, so I'll address a comment from the first video and tell you a little about where this channel is going. Somebody in the comments pointed out that it's technically incorrect to call the Kaiwan Victory Cry glitch a glitch, since it is an intended mechanic. While I agree that it isn't a glitch in the same way that a wrong warp or item duplication is, it's important to understand that glitch is an inherently semantic term. While it's using an intended mechanic, it's producing an unintended result, for a result that is almost inarguably detrimental to the intended experience of the game. This is not me putting this commenter 100% agree with them, but it is a purely semantic issue, and most people will call it a glitch. Other than that, not really anything worth responding to from that comment section. Most people just commented the word underrated and then a precedingly higher number, which was odd. I think I'm going to be making more personal self-content for a while with this channel. The fan compilations won't be going anywhere for the time being, but if I start taking this whole YouTube thing seriously, maybe I'll put them up on another channel, or if someone asks me to relocate them. For now, I'm kind of just throwing shit at a wall and doing whatever I want, so, you know, be on the lookout. For the time being, I'm working on an editing project for somebody else, and I occasionally do play games on Twitch. Maybe it'll be Persona 4. Not the 99 thing, but Persona 4. Do you want that? I don't have an ending for this, so it's over now. Bye!
Defending against cyber attacks requires seeing in the dark, understanding every threat to your organization on computers, mobile, and cloud. It takes cyberism and cyber attacks from enemies to everywhere.
Pick up like a pro. Turkey sub and a hot tub. Pick it up fast when you order it in the app.
For the longest time, most bleach funds myself included have been referring to this as Ichigo's true Bankai, while in fact, that may be so far from the truth. So today, I'm gonna be discussing about Ichigo's Bankai and what it will look like when it undergoes its first evolution. I'd like to first ask that you drop a like on the video. Please watch to the end as it supports the channel, and subscribe to the channel for more Bleach videos and videos like this. Let's begin. So, as most of you already know, Ichigo has a new Bankai. It's not that much interesting because it really just does what his other Bankai did, except it's more powerful. But I will restrain anyone from writing Ichigo's new Bankai off. We got confirmation that the new Tensei Zangetsu is powerful enough to scare Yuha, and as I have always said, that in itself is all you need to know that it's powerful. So Ichigo's new Bankai, unlike others, is made from a combination of his Quincy and Shinigami powers. Ichigo's Shikai swords were forged from his Quincy and Shinigami powers, and when he goes Bankai, he combines both of those swords. His Bankai is a big black and white sword with a chain connected to it on both ends. So the mistake most of us make is by calling that Bankai Ichigo's true Bankai, and here's why. So in the final arc when Yamamoto was fighting Yuha, he goes on to explain the mechanics of a Bankai. So when Yamamoto released his Bankai, Yuha explains to Ashford that Zanka no Tachi compresses all the flames of Fujindaka onto the sword, and everything it has is burnt by an explosive flame. To which Yamamoto replies with, "You've seen my Bankai before, but is it the same?" Which shocks Yuha. Now keep in mind, this was not the real Yuha, but the memories were indeed Yuha. So Yuha is shocked when Yamamoto's sword cuts his robe of Dazen Ani, and he even asks himself, has his Bankai really changed from 1,000 years ago? Yamamoto finally reveals that Zanka no Tachi does not compress the flames onto the full sword, but onto the tip of his sword, unlike 1,000 years ago as per Yuka's explanation of it, and that anything it cuts is not burnt by an explosive flame, but gets erased without a trace. So basically, Yamamoto's Bankai completely evolved from what it was back then. And later on in that fight, Yamamoto explains that a Bankai evolves with its Shinigami, especially a new Bankai at that, and he goes on to even give an example of Ichigo in his full-king Bankai, noting that Ichigo has room to evolve, which leads me to the main topic of Ichigo's Bankai. As I said before, calling the Bankai Ichigo acquires at the end of the manga his true Bankai is wrong. We can indeed call it his new Bankai, but not his true Bankai. Judging from Yamamoto's explanation, we are so far away from even seeing something close to Ichigo's true Bankai. Ichigo himself hasn't even mastered using his powers and drawing them out and truly combining them. If you play Bleach Brave Souls, then you have probably seen this form. This black and blue form is from Ichigo combining all his powers, Shinigami, Oro, and Quincy, all in one. And this form was supervised by Tensei Kubo himself, which means he approved of it. Ichigo in this form can fully utilize something that resembles a Quincy bow, but it's made from Reiatsu, and he shoots Reiatsu projectiles from it. He also has his being active all the time in this form, which is weird because Blue Flame only becomes visible when the user is trying to the ultimate attack of this Ichigo involves the about those who know, that of the biggest Bankai is done by focusing in reality. Ichigo has these powers, but we used the Blue twice, but that was somebody fucking including to the life of the Green or the Blue Artery, which means Ichigo's powers are quite far from being fully mastered, but they're quite far from being mastered even a little bit faster. I mean, putting him to bring up one by himself. He needed Yuka's help. His third Bankai is just a rough stretch of where his Bankai is needed for increasing and becoming powers, yet he can't even use anything else other than get close himself with that Bankai. Are you guys getting me? Ichigo is nowhere near mastering his powers, and even I can't tell what his true master power is. But I can tell you what I think the first evolution of Ichigo's Bankai will be, and the powers it controls. So let's get on. Ichigo can combine his hollow powers in his hands. So the first evolution of Ichigo's Bankai would involve him drawing out his Quincy powers. I'm talking about him being able to actually use Quincy abilities. Much like the Bleach Brave Souls Quincy Ichigo on his first evolution of Bankai should be capable of using the Blood Fin and Blood Artery intentionally. The Blood Fin will boost his defense, and durability drastically, and the Blood Artery will boost its attack power by almost double. Just imagine that. Ichigo is a really powerful Quincy, as I explained in my video of him, so I fully expect him to also output his Quincy Reatsu when performing a Getsuga Tensho, which on top of the Blood Artery will double the attack power of the Getsuga Tensho. I don't expect him to become a fully fledged Quincy on his fast Bankai evolution, but he should also learn how to counter up a Quincy ball like Gerard and his Brave Soul's counterpart. Don't get me wrong, Ichigo can literally do all that by winning Shikai, but the point is him utilizing his utmost Shinigami powers, which is his Bankai, and his Quincy powers, which are also in the Bankai. So in short, during the first evolution of his Bankai, Ichigo will look like the Brave Soul's Quincy Ichigo, but with his Bankai sword, with Blood Vein or Blood Artery being constantly active, and he can use a Reishi Quincy bomb. That should be his first evolution. So to sum things up, Ichigo in the first evolution of his Bankai will look like this Quincy Shinigami hybrid that can use multiple Quincy and Shinigami abilities at the same time to create a monster like Ikone Ubukeno. In the second part of this video, I will go through Ichigo having full control of his holo powers and drawing out both of his pawns. That was it for today. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in the next one.
When it comes to the most important people in your life, you want to be there. Even when you're far apart.
Hey guys, what's up? Today I want to show you 10 JRPGs with great stories but bad gameplay mechanics. Seriously, some of these games I actually enjoy them, but the truth is that in my opinion, the gameplay is just nowhere near as good as the story. So let's begin! Number 10, Legend of Legacy. This little gem in the 3DS was supposed to be a huge project, but it was so important that even JRPG veterans like writer Masato Kato joined into the development. And yeah, thanks to him, the story was great. Besides having a really interesting lore, the game follows a story through 7 points of view and characters intertwined. Each ends up in the town of Inishu for their own personal reasons, hence becoming adventurers tasked by the king to map the uncharted areas of the land of Avalon. By exploring the different regions, characters will go into dark, mystical, and bizarre experiences as they start facing their own demons. If this reminds you of the Saga games, then you guessed it. Legend of Legacy was inspired by that series. Too bad the gameplay itself proved a boring, repetitive, and uninspiring challenge for gamers worldwide. Despite its extremely cryptic nature while navigating the areas, the mapping alone will take forever, especially because you run into monsters all the time, rendering the experience annoyingly pointless. Only decent thing was the battle system, but it too became dull after a while. Combat puts the 3 selected main characters into grids called formations. You can change the formation per player turn, which is nice, and there's even a variety of battle stances thanks to them. And of course, you don't level up. Instead, your characters randomly increase status, just like in the Saga games. But honestly, as interesting as this system sounds, it turns tedious immediately due to the high encounter rate. As a result of its gameplay, Legend of Legacy got mixed reviews and poor reception. The failure of this game, however, led to its developers being so frustrated they took the original ideas and improved them. The result was a beautiful game called The Alliance Alive. Number 9, Mimana Iya Chronicle. This one is very light-hearted and it acts more like a comedy of some sorts. I found Praise, the main character, extremely funny. He's an edgelord with zero patience and really cynical combats. He's an asshole, alright, but a damn hilarious one. He accepts a job to become the bodyguard of Sophie, a young girl traveling to collect 7 gems. The dark plot is obviously related to their pilgrimage, of course, but during it, Sophie will also be joined by other characters, like Melrose, for example, an obsessive magician that's even more hilarious than Grace. So I admit I included this game because it's one of the funniest games I've ever played, and that's exactly where its charm is. Not the greatest story, but one of the greatest comedies. The gameplay, though, it's an action RPG that plays like a very watered-down version of any Tales game. Controls are bad, hit detection is bad, party members are controlled by an artificial intelligence, sometimes they help, sometimes they do absolutely nothing. Of course, there's a combo system, skills, magic, and all the usual RPG battle attributes, and they're decent, but they're also ruined by the poorly designed combat. Navigation of battle is fine with the camera on the view, cannot be an issue into finding certain things or places. Another major problem is the exploration in the dungeons. Areas are fine with this map. It's not as confusing as others I've seen so far, but the dungeons not only have zero music, they can be quite a pain in the ass to navigate through, as they're unappealing and bland. Encounter rate isn't that high, but getting into battles is the last thing you want to do in this game sometimes. It's honestly not that bad, which is still why I think of it as a hidden gem. I really like this game, but I'm very well aware of how its gameplay mechanics are sorely mediocre. Number 8, Infinite Space. Meet a really unique space simulator, but a very boring one. A rare game on the Nintendo DS that stayed in the shadows, perhaps for good reasons. Let me praise the story first, though, as it truly had a fantastic concept. Humankind can travel freely across galaxies in their badass ships. Yuri is a rookie captain of one of these ships, and he's traveling the universe to investigate the epitaphs, strange artifacts that seem to be connected to the dark origins of void gates and black holes. His research, however, is often opposed by an enemy intergalactic empire who's trying to conquer a key galaxy. One of the most interesting aspects of the story is how it's told through 2 arcs. Upon reaching a certain point of the game, the plot will jump 10 years into the future, where Yuri, once again, will try to get to the bottom of things and stop the invasive empire.
Only the
It has a
finest
strong
goods.
character development and interesting relationships among the ship's crew, and sometimes some decisions you make can truly affect the outcome of the game. But one look at its battle mechanics and your hype will vanish entirely. Slow, complex, convoluted, your ship faces off enemy ships. Battles occur in real time and you gotta wait for this hard-to-explain command gauge to execute your actions. Understanding it and controlling it's a pain in the ass because it also regulates moving and dodging. You know, this game doesn't have bad gameplay, it just has a bad battle system. If not for that, it would have been a masterpiece. To make matters worse, however, the entire game is controlled by the stylus. That speaks volumes, doesn't it? If you're wondering about the space simulator, or rather ship simulator, yes, there's one. It actually involves the management of up to 150 crew members and several design models. But I definitely didn't care too much for it. If you can find a way to enjoy the combat here, and if you're into customizing spaceships and exploring galaxies, I guarantee you'll absolutely love this game. As always, I suggest you give it a try anyway to have your own opinion. Number 7, Baroque.
In a world where everybody matters, each of us has a story to tell.
I started at the bottom. I worked hard to rise above.
Born restless and a loner. When adventure called, it didn't need to ask twice.
With my own 2 hands, I forged a good life for myself.
I roamed far from the forest to the cities. Always my heart yearned to see more.
My efforts paid off in the local market. Silver flowed like water.
There were always a few obstacles, but nothing I could land.
Baroque on the PS2 and the Wii was also a huge project gone wrong. Now I'm talking about its remake, not the original version on the Sega Saturn, only in Japan, which was vastly different. It was developed by Peak Entertainment, famous for producing hard and overly complicated games. A visual novel, a book, a manga, and even various video game spin-offs based on it. All in vain as the remake itself flopped in reviews. Story was great though, which means at least the non-gaming media is completely worth it. Baroque sets for a post-apocalyptic and highly dark universe with an amnesiac protagonist at the center. He encounters a mysterious angel who tasks him with exploring an obscure tower. His main goal, though, is to eliminate the meta beings, humans who transform into monsters thanks to the horrible delusions of reality inside the tower. The plot involves human experimentation, questioning of religion, bizarre science fiction elements. It's awesome! But the gameplay completely destroys it all. It's a roguelike RPG, so it's very hard and rough, like most of its kind. But this one plays also like an action RPG, where you can fully move and control your character. Yeah, with terrible camera, awfully dark graphics, and horrendous difficulty spikes. Collision detection works whenever, and because of the aforementioned issues, it makes some fights frustrating. And oh yeah, you die on any floor and you go back to the beginning to level 1 with all your items lost, like most roguelike RPGs. So for starters, since that genre isn't for everybody, therefore the game as well isn't for everybody, right? Well, I'd say this game isn't for anybody, it's for nobody, it's bad! I sound angry because I really dug the concept, the ideas, and the plot of Baroque. I guess I'll have to settle with the other media connected to it and forget this remake ever happened in the first place. Number 6, Kudelka. Kudelka was yet another attempt to mix survival horror with RPG. It didn't go wrong, but it definitely didn't go right either. But we'll get to that later. It takes place in Wales during what looks to be the 19th century. Kudelka is a powerful psychic that travels to a medieval monastery, mysteriously converted into a mansion. However, it's infested with horrible creatures maneuvered by supernatural forces. Upon teaming up with another adventurer and an eccentric priest, they decide to unravel the mysteries of the monastery in order to escape, and also to find out why the monsters and people there seem to be specifically targeting them. Gothic-style horror elements, dark plot, mature story. It truly makes you wonder why it got a mixed and lukewarm reception, doesn't it? Well, because its gameplay mechanics were poorly executed. The problem was about a dispute between the development staff not seeing eye to eye with some things and whatnot. Anyway, Kudelka has tank controls like the Resident Evil games. So that's off to a bad start. Random encounters are there in the entire mansion. Rate isn't that high, but it can ruin your exploration and puzzle solving with battles that take just too long. No, you can't escape from them. A terrible design decision. Battle system isn't bad actually, but it doesn't really keep you immersed because of its extremely dull and repetitive interface. I guess it's original since it's turn-based, but the characters can move on grids, weapons break, guns run out of ammo, magic is very limited, so while being classic, it can be annoying and frustrating. The whole point of the game is to go around the mansion looking for clues to solve mysteries and puzzles, but it's too damn dark to see in some areas that sometimes you can't figure out where to go or what to do. Imagine that situation being constantly repeated with random encounters getting in the way. Yeah, it's not that bad, but it's bad nonetheless. Kudelka left the basis to Shadow Hearts, where developers learned from every mistake and nailed it. I can't forget how the series' origins came from this convoluted mess of a game. Number 5, Wild Arms Crossfire. Take a look at the game that killed this underrated franchise, a PSP grid-based strategy RPG and also a spin-off. The story is really cool here. Check this out. Like any Wild Arms game, it takes place in the dying continent of Filgaia. two drifters, Clarissa and Felius, arrive in the kingdom of Eldesius, pursuing a thief assassin who killed Clarissa's mother. Her goal is to track down the killer, but unfortunately she ends up getting dragged into the harsh reality of the kingdom, especially since people believe her to be the lost, the true heir to the throne. She then takes up arms to build a resistance army in order to fight the Empire and take down her mother's killer. This game has a lot of personality, and it could have been a true gem amongst the series, but as a tactical RPG, it just disappoints. It seems to mostly known for its horrible escort missions, and therefore, its frustrating spies. The system isn't bad at all. Characters move on grids that are actually small hexes. Range attacks play an important part since it's wild arms, so you have the shooting arms and weapons. If it wasn't for its bad map designs and its disastrous mission objectives on certain chapters, this could have been a great game. Problem is that there is a time limit. Not literally, but it pressures you to end the battles quickly. Why? Because there's a damn vitality system. Vitality points are reduced every turn by an amount equal to the weight of what the characters have equipped. So they lose HP every single time. And some battles have turn limits, meaning if you don't complete the mission objective in a very small amount of turns, you're dead. I guess developers were trying to implement the classic use of wild arms puzzle during missions, but they screwed up big time. Number 4, Phantasy Star. The first Phantasy Star may have an excuse for being a very old precursor to the genre, but I grew up with games of this kind, and I can swear, if I had played this game back then, I would have disliked it nonetheless. The story was great because it came around a time when female protagonists in video games were scarce, and a plot about revenge against nobility for killing her older brother gave Alice a legitimate purpose to fight the classic evil king. Today, this will be an extremely generic plot. Back then, it was one of the first ones of its kind. Most cliched stories take after games like this, actually. It's just the gameplay can be very tough to enjoy. I keep saying even for its time, it included some ideas that were just plain bad.
Simple tax returns only. Snap your W-2 and file Fed and State for free. Guaranteed. Get the app now. I was good.
It's been nearly a year since the first installment in the ongoing remake of Final Fantasy VII. This will be a video diving into not only what, after that period of off and on continuous play, the Final Fantasy VII remake does right for me, but also into what makes any remake worth doing, and ultimately where I think the general trend needs to go.
We should be careful. High security here.
Remakes in general have become a cottage industry, as 2020 at large can attest to. For months now, rumors have persisted that Blue Point Games, the studio behind several remakes and remasters, including the recent PS5 launch title Demon's Souls, are going to remake a different 90s PSX classic. Not Final Fantasy, but Metal Gear Solid 1. We got updated versions of a large number of games, from Commandos 2 to the PS2 era cult classic 13 to Destroy All Humans, Mafia, Resident Evil 3, Black Mesa, and more. Now, with the exception of Black Mesa, none of the remakes I've just mentioned were particularly noteworthy or even good. The industry seems to be in danger of mimicking the Hollywood system too closely, I think. Which is a grim bit of irony, considering how long the games have wanted to be movies, or at least on the movies level as a pop culture phenomenon.
I've been
to be a bit grumpy when it comes to big-budget movies over the last decade or so, largely as a result of how I feel about the culture of modern-day monopolies. I'm no communist, but you don't have to be Vladimir I. Lenin to admit the consolidation of Disney, Fox, Halliburton, Google, Pepsi, etc. has given, say, the Marvel Extended Universe all the oxygen in the room, while suffocating most, if not any, mid- or small-budget films from wide release. Unless it's award season, you won't find too many English-speaking films with new characters or new storylines to speak of. And now, what with Disney reportedly trying to get an Oscar for Wonder Woman 1984, who knows how long it'll be before even Oscar-bait movies, as formulaic as they've already become, also go the way of the dodo. In the 20th and early 21st centuries, we had this thing called art house cinema. There was a place for new ideas and unfamiliar subject matter in movies, a place for auteurs and so forth, like David Lynch or Wes Anderson or Sofia Coppola. But with the Disney, Viacom, Dow Chemical Skynets of the modern age, most of these types of artists have been pushed onto TV platforms or streaming services like Netflix to make room for what are essentially two kinds of popcorn film: remakes and sequels, which often feel so similar to their original that they verge on being remakes all of their own. Now, some might argue, reasonably, that the real reason that megacorporations are doing this desolation of contemporary cinema is merely to compete with the media business model that may have first begun with the MMORPG. That is, the model of a continuous, unending stream of addictive content that you never really own as much as you pay rent on. This rent model, of course, we can also compare to software updates, which we all know are never permanent. The newest Marvel film may as well be titled Superhero Film 4.0 to follow the last three, or whatever. And that brings us back, of course, to video games, and how uniquely well they are suited to the remake as a variant concept. I mentioned this in an earlier video on Final Fantasy VII, by the way, but it bears more focusing on here. Since games are kind of the original hybrid between software services and narrative entertainment, they work especially well as remakes and remasters. At least on paper, who doesn't want to see their favorite game done over again with better graphics, longer play length, and higher budgets on newer hardware? Well, there's just one problem here. I'd argue that even though games may be well suited to remakes, there's some aspects to truly great games that are next to impossible to ever truly reproduce. And it has nothing to do with hardware or software. It has to do with context, and more philosophically, the difference that stubbornly continues to exist between a real thing and its digital copy, between man and machine, between an original and its replicant, to borrow a term from Blade Runner. And the difference is the one as companies continue to try to merely replicate the original, rather than reimagining it in a new way with the same spirit. The Final Fantasy VII Remake works in 2020 in ways that Bluepoint's Demon Souls, or even Nintendo's recent rush ports of the 3 early 21st century Mario World games don't. Why? Well, setting aside how rushed the Mario remasters feel, they just don't exist in their original context anymore. Mario 64 debuted at the cutting edge of 90s era real-time 3D. The game was designed around the Nintendo 64 and vice versa, actually. The huge strides made in basic game design and controls since then, though, make it basically a pain in the ass to play Super Mario 64 now. Mario Sunshine, meanwhile, was a big deal for the early GameCube era in ways that just don't hold up now, even if following a post-launch update, you now can at least play it with the GameCube controller like it was designed with. But to that point, Super Mario Galaxy HD can't even be played on the Switch with the Wiimote, defeating the whole point in some respects of the original. All 3 Mario games are still masterpieces of their era and in their time. But the problem is you can't just coattail ride on yesterday and it's nostalgia forever. There's a very cynical philosophy out there in the games world that argues all anybody's really looking for is a repeat of the feeling that we had the first time we picked up a controller and were really blown away by what this medium could do when we were kids or teenagers. Remakes and remasters seem to cater to this principle in ways that I worry might be damaging to the medium long term. Due, of course, simply to the logic of the law of diminishing returns.
You shouldn't be here.
made, say, the 90s era of games special, it isn't the brand names that we now all recognize and take for granted. It's the sense of newness, of experimentation, and dare I say playfulness with this pop art form that really mattered about, say, Super Mario 64, or even Metal Gear Solid 1. What mattered is that these were kinds of games that we had never seen or played before. How ironic that now, almost 30 years later, game companies think that what we really want is the complete opposite. Well, not all game companies make this mistake. While from what I've seen and heard secondhand, Blue Point's Demon's Souls is more or less a Hollywoodized recreation of the source material with better graphics, but without a lot of the visual uniqueness of the original and all of its frustrating and slightly dated design. The same cannot be said about the main topic for this video, the recent remake of the first fifth or so of Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII Remake certainly does want to cash in on nostalgia, make no mistake. But when you're recreating something this important and influential, ironically it's much riskier than you might think. Square Enix put themselves in what at first looked like a no-win scenario. Even one hair out of place and they'd have the fans going crazy in a bad way. Yet, just recreate the original exactly and they'd have just as many players, just as disappointed, and just as wondering why they don't just play the original on one of its many, many ported editions instead. The tension between these objectives, between making something truly new versus making something faithful, at least in spirit, to the original, is at the crux of this Final Fantasy VII Remake project. And after now having spent about 100 hours over the past year playing through FF7R, as I'll call it, multiple times at different difficulties, I can fully commit to the opinion that by any fair or worthwhile standard, Square nothing with this remake. As you already know, I, along with most other critics and commentators, love this game. So let's get to why, specifically in light of those extra hours I put into the game, and in light of it being, as I claim, an exemplary case of an actually worthy, even vital remake. Final Fantasy VII-R is both a true return to the first FF7 and its complete opposite. Balancing both of these aspects is why it works. Let me try to explain. The original FF7, as we saw in an earlier video, was all but rushed to completion, developed as it was in little under a year. The remake's first entry, on the other hand, takes its time. Not only to, admittedly, milk what is bound to be, if they keep up the great work, a massive cash cow for Square Enix, but to honestly give the original story, characters, and themes the time that they deserve. And while FF7R breathtakingly reinvents the PSX original, the devs at Square seemingly have realized that what I said earlier, that what really blew us away back then was not merely FF7 itself, but FF7 as something new. Something both technically, narratively, and mechanically that we had never seen or played before. They do this here not only by recontextualizing the entire game as a kind of tactical RPG action that I've never seen before, but also by introducing into the story all the things that have emerged since the original's debut, including not only characters and nods to other games and extended media outside the first Final Fantasy VII, but even including the very fandom itself. That's right, throughout the party's adventure here, as I'm sure you've heard or seen for yourself, you are plagued by these Dementor-like beings called Whispers. These creatures show up to keep the story on a predetermined path, introducing themes in the broader narrative relating to things like fate and free will and the canon and fandom that, of course, did not exist in the original.
Oh, great. These assholes again. Probably some Shinra science experiment.
Whispers. Perhaps best described as arbiters of fate. They are drawn to those who attempt to alter destiny's course and ensure they do not.
Like capital D destiny?
The flow of the great river that is the planet, from inception to oblivion.
Now you're saying that that flow is somehow fixed?
I don't want to be
Yes,
spotted here.
for it is the will of the planet itself.
So if we're destined for a bleak future, these whispers will try to keep us on that course?
The Whispers have been called by many critics a stand-in for the kind of die-hard fans that Square Enix knew they'd be up against. And I think there's something to that. After all, it was a given that there would be these die-hard fans who wouldn't like any changes that Square would make to their beloved classic. That's why I think it really took balls for Square to do the unthinkable here and actually change elements of how this installment ends, knowing full well how this sacrilege might be received. Yes, it's risky. It may piss off your most loyal fans, like we've seen in recent years, by the way, with the similar ballsiness of Hideaki Anno in changing huge swaths of the third installment in his ongoing cinematic reinvention of the ultra-beloved anime series Neon Genesis Evangelion, or to some extent in the fan reaction to Hideo Kojima's MGS-V in Death Stranding. Consumer thinks they always know best, and it's true that in Japan, they even often say that the customer is God. But the Japanese also have a different tradition, omakase, where the dish is left up to the chef out of trust and respect for their craft. Whether as remakes or original titles, I believe game devs have an artistic, if not ethical, responsibility to challenge our palates to some extent. To put on our plates new flavors and textures that we may not know we'll like until after it's fully eaten. It's hard to keep the player's attention nowadays due to the just massive number of great games that are out there in this era. I respect and love that FF7R stays true not only to the look of the original, to all the things, in other words, that can be replicated and directly enhanced upon with new technology, but also to the original's context, to its spirit. That spirit being not only of newness, but of marrying together tastes from both East and West, to synthesize something that truly feels and plays new. Let me be more specific. As I've tried to platinum this game and unlock everything it has to show me, FF7R has forced me to drastically reassess the entire game. There were relatively big pieces that I missed about, say, Chapter 9 in Wall Market that only became clear the second and third time around. There were even crucial elements to just how each character plays in battle that I missed before I got the chance to use them in VR challenges on hard solo. Every facet of this game is near perfectly balanced and thought through well in advance. For example, Chapter 9 tends to be where a large concentration of missable content is, which means that when you replay it, it doesn't just feel like you're mindlessly grinding or going through a slightly boring replay, like other games can feel with their mini or meta games. The same is true for the way FF7R's hard mode works in general. First thing to say about hard mode is you can't use items. Once you hit the cap of level 50, meanwhile, you can't level up. And you can only get more SP, or skill points, to strengthen your weapons by completing very specific challenges in each chapter, which you of course first have to find. Now at first, all this makes hard mode seem impossible as well as counterintuitive. You've just spent the entire first run of the game leveling up and getting all this awesome materia, and now you can't use it? Apart from certain abilities, the only real way to regain MP from chapter to chapter is by destroying these boxes, which only restores a couple of points. That means you can't just spam higher level spells. And that goes for healing spells too, which, in the absence of items, at first seems to be your only method of staying alive. Well, once you push past this initial misapprehension, you find that hard mode is actually more doable than it seems. 2 pieces of materia, Prey and Chakra, can heal without the need for MP. But considering how much more damage even minor enemies now deal, all this means you have to be very smart about how you use all your materia to stay afloat on hard. And suddenly, lots of features to the combat become important to track. And as a result, combat on hard remains engaging even 100 hours in.
Something's blocking this.
Now, ever since the original Kingdom Hearts, Square games with action RPG elements have had this annoying bug where getting hit can interrupt your action, and that's especially annoying if you're casting a spell. FF7R turns this into not a bug, but a feature. There are stats and even abilities that determine how easily you'll be interrupted, and now you can also interrupt your enemies too. This gives combat a more grounded, brute force feel, as unlike in the original, not every well-chosen action is guaranteed to happen in a vacuum, independent of any actual conflict on the ground. The way FF7R reworks the materia system for this new genre is a triumph in of itself. This is probably the best mechanical example of how I've been saying the remake pulls itself off as a reinvention. Like old times, there's that thrilling addictiveness again, and that quality of emergent gameplay to the mixing and matching of materia and seeing novel ways they can combine. Yet unlike before, a lot of materia affects how the actual action plays out. One I never really got down, but I love in theory, and is a good example of this, is synergy, which automates group magical attacks. But my favorite other examples here are the purple materia class. I gave Tifa a ton of these, which, in combination with an accessory that meant consuming her ATB gauge raised her limit break, and focusing her weapon upgrades mostly on speed, all meant that usually Tifa was fast as hell, and achieved her special moves just as quickly on the battlefield. Barrett, meanwhile, I gave a ton of health boosting materia, made him the medic, which worked well with his long-range attacks, and that would keep them usually outside the fray. I also gave him Provoke to automatically aggro enemies away from the rest of the party once they got in serious danger. Though it should be said that some of this materia doesn't always work against stronger bosses. To be sure, it can still be a pain when I'm interrupted in the middle of casting a spell. And in boss fights, there are certain times when the game just locks you out of damaging the enemy further for a sec until they get a chance to do something important, which, if you're unlucky, can result in you wasting precious MP or limit breaks. This same frustration can also result if your target happens to just move around too much. But these are minor gripes for a combat system that, on the whole, works much better than it should. The devs drew a lot of inspiration from the Dissidia series, and to great effect. That's to say nothing of the game's other key predecessors, Crisis Core, FF13 and 15, as well as it trying to match in gameplay the high-octane action scenes from the FF7 movie, Advent Children. Unlike a straight RPG, like the original game, even at max level, I can't rely on stats alone to help me power through every enemy. I still have to be smart about how I approach a given boss fight. This is a game that combines RPG stat building and abilities with action gameplay via light tactical elements in ways that force you, on hard at least, to think very carefully about not only how you'll enter a big battle, but how you'll select each and every move along the way. This combines all the best elements of JRPGs and tactical RPGs that are popular in Japan with Western RPGs and action games that are more popular, of course, in the West. I still can't master the final 7-star challenge inside the Shinra Combat Simulator, and not only because I still have, even 100 hours in, materia I need to level and skill points I need to obtain for my party's weapons. Even once I have perfectly built weapons and all fully maxed out materia, there's an element of skill combined with luck, combined with careful pre-planning, that all makes every big battle on hard blood-pumpingly amazing, even 2, 3, or 4 times over. And another thing, each character I figured out isn't completely interchangeable. This is something I alluded to a moment ago. You can give the same exact materia to, say, Aerith and Barrett, but their different base stats, as well as their different real-time play styles, will create completely different results. Mastering FF7 on hard seems to be a game of using trial and error to figure out the mix and match strategy that works best, not only for your given party, but for you as the one controlling them. Much like the game at large, it's always a question of balance and tension between extremes, a process of taking what you already know or think you know and applying it to something completely new.
NerdWallet's 2021 Best of Awards put the best mortgage lenders, investing accounts, and more in one list. Let's go.
I'm sleepy.
More cycling with live.
That's right, let's go.
NerdWallet's Best of Awards list.